Coogs House. The Houston Cougars are seeing the Big 12 expand next season, but did someone or some Beavers drop some nuggets on the future of the conference last week?
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. You break down all things Cougs, and whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who can't step by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. If you want to join in the conversation but don't know what to say, tell us your favorite brand of hot sauce. I'm torn between two, a green one and a red one. I'm more into the flavor. More on that later. But actually, today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn, and there will be actually more on that later as well. We got to talk about, I think there's a positive transfer portal thing that hit me over the weekend that I want to talk to you a little bit about today. I want to talk to some about the receivers that are out there, the pass catchers. I think if you want to look at it, we can look at it together because I think there's something worth noticing. But first and foremost, the news of the week last week might have gone under the radar. And that's a handful of Beaver nuggets dropped out there by the Oregon State Beavers. Now, the news, as it was laid out, is that Oregon State announced a couple of home and homes in their near future. In 2025 and 2026, they're going to be playing with Houston and home and home. They're also going to be playing Texas Tech in those two seasons. They also, down the line in 2030 and 31, added Kansas State in a home and home series. Now, Oregon State's in a weird predicament when the whole Pac-12 fell apart. A handful of teams went to the Big 10, a handful of teams went to the Big 12. Oregon State and Washington State got left out, right? And they're kind of putting things together. They're going to play some Mountain West teams. They've got a bunch of Power Fives on their schedule in 2024, and they're kind of moving to where, like, what are they going to do next? Right? They have to figure out what the next situation or solution is. And I weirdly, in looking at this over the weekend, like, in the weekend, you're reflecting back on the week, looking back what happened, what didn't happen. I was like, I didn't even think to talk a whole lot about that Oregon State game. What do they look like? Wait a second. Is this a nugget that they're building upon, something for the future? Because in a lot of ways, this feels like a 2025-2026 matchup, not unlike when Houston had matchups with Arizona, Colorado, Utah, and stuff on the slate down the line. Now, the Big 12 requires teams to play an FCS, a Group of Five, and Power Five or Power Four at this point team in their non-conference games, right? That's why next year Houston's got like Rice, Houston's got, I believe, UNLV, Rice, and Oklahoma. No FCS team, but they have two Group of Five teams in Oklahoma. The FCS team typically will get dropped. We'll see that come up later. In 2026, for instance, they have Oregon State now, Rice, and Georgia Southern, right? Or 2027, LSU at Rice, Georgia Southern, right? You kind of have these combination things in there. They used to have on the schedule down the line Colorado and Utah and Arizona in various years. I believe Arizona was on the best slate. That might have just been a rumor as Power 5 teams. But now those teams are in the Big 12 conference. No need to play them in non-conference if you're going to potentially see them throughout the conference as that schedule matrix continues to shift and evolve. Oregon State needs Power 5 opponents in an SOS kind of fashion, right? They need strength of schedule, but also SOS, like, help me, right? Like all the things. Houston's Power 5. They could obviously see Houston as a rebuilding Power 5 as they make the coaching transition, right? Totally get why that would be on their radar, obviously. I think it's interesting. I'm looking at their 2024 slate for Oregon State. They got San Diego State, Group of Five, but a strong one. Oregon, Purdue, Nevada, UNLV, and Colorado State. Again, strong Group of Five teams out there west. At Cal is their big road P5 game, P4 game. Very winnable game for Oregon State. And as you look at that lineup, you see, like, okay, if that's as strong as it gets, they kind of do need to fill some holes in here, right? And so then the next year they play Houston. Right now on the schedule, they got Houston at Oregon, at Tech, and Cal as Power 5 team or Power 4 teams. I keep saying 5. Power 4 teams on their 2025 schedule. I wonder if this nugget they're dropping is one of two things. One, like Colorado and other schools, are they scheduling Big 12 teams to kind of introduce themselves to conference like a, hey, we're over here if you need us kind of option, right? If those games get to be competitive, if the Texas Tech game, the Houston games, etc., get competitive and fun and draw a lot of TV crowd, kind of get the West Coast acquainted, the Lone Star State, are you suddenly looking like, hey, Brett, you are Mark, we're over here, like we're okay, we can come over, are you looking at some sort of a combination there, or is it the inverse? Do they have these now Big Ten games, Big Ten traditions like Oregon and Cal, they have these Big Ten games in 2024 and 25 and not have Big Ten games in 26, 7, 8, 9 on through 31 because they're looking at can they find a way to jump into the Big Ten on Oregon's back, right? I see it as operating in one of two fashions as a potential like nugget for what could be coming down the line for them. Now, honestly and obviously, I think the more realistic option for them is the ever-expanding Big 12. Mark seems to be obsessed with getting this thing coast to coast, all corners of the globe if he can, or going to Mexico, right? Like, I mean, everywhere he can get it, the Big 12 will be. And if Oregon State is his avenue into the Pacific Northwest and they have a football program unlike Gonzaga, I wonder if he entertains this idea some. I mean, you got Washington State up there too, and we'll see what they look like over the course of the near future with this like ever-evolving football landscape, right? But I think that there's some reason to be paying attention to this beyond just, it'll be a fun team to play, home and home, 25-26, Now, I will say for Houston, I think this sets up a pretty solid scheduling deal. So 2024 schedule is tough. UNLV is a good group of 5 team. At Oklahoma, the second week of the season is going to be tough, especially for a new program with a new coach. And then Rice, you don't want to look past because they beat you last year, right? So like that's what you have to open up 2024. But in 2025, at Rice, which is not really a road game down the street, right? Boise State comes home, and then that's a group of 5 team at home to open up your home slate. And then at Oregon State later in September. But Oregon State, if this Power 4 thing is hurting them, might not be a traditional Power 5 type of team in 2025. 2026, you've got Oregon State at home, Rice at home, and then at Georgia Southern. Again, like a fairly favorable schedule potentially if Oregon State's taking a hit here, all leading you towards that 2027 slate where you're open the season with LSU at NRG Stadium, you're at Rice, and you host Georgia Southern. 3 not quite home games, but also home games to open the season with. 2027, if you can build the program up, has this crazy favorable open to work, get you nationally recognized games like LSU, but also favorable slates as far as home and road and those kinds of things. If you can use this 2025, 2026 seasons, that pair there, to build something, right? Build some wins, get some momentum, get the recruits and the NILs and all those kinds of things rolling, that could open up for a fairly exciting 2027 season. I obviously would like it to happen earlier, but I think it's worth noting that Oregon State as a Power 5 team, you're like required by Big 12 Power 5 team in the non-conference. You only get one of those. You're only supposed to be playing one of those in the non-conference. That is a pretty favorable line as well because it goes one of two ways. Either they become a Big 12 team sometime down the road and, all right, now we got to reschedule, find a new team, new game. Or Oregon State takes this nosedive bomb that I think's not crazy to anticipate. And then suddenly your Power 5 team you've got to play to start the season is barely really one of those. Now, I don't know which direction this goes. And for all I know, they could join the Big Ten, become a Power 5 team that's really, really good and run the whole. I don't think that's the feasible option here. And I think that this is a sign Oregon's like, come help us, please. Oregon State, that is like, come help us, please. Or it's a chance for Yormark to dabble some. Now, obviously, that's me reading between the lines, getting a little bit like uh, tinfoil hatty conspiracy theorist guy, but I do think these things happen weirdly and randomly, and this feels less weird and less random than other things that have happened in conference realignment. I mean, the Mustangs are in the ACC. Like weird things tend to happen in this. So it'll be interesting to see how all that goes down. Now, could the ACC fall apart and none of it matter? Sure. I I weirdly think this is independent of all of that. We'll be keeping an eye on it, the ever evolving Big 12, and more soon. I want to talk more about this season and the receivers that are potentially coming to campus. I say potentially because they're not officially committed anywhere yet. But before we get into that, much like Willie Fritz is building his roster out of great college football players, and we talk about that the rest of the episode, you're probably doing the same for your small businesses. And when you're hiring for your small business, you're going to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. And LinkedIn Jobs is the tools you need to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn is not just another job board. It helps you find and hire professionals that you cannot find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. LinkedIn knows that small business owners are wearing multiple hats and might not have the time and resources to hire. And that's why LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process easier and quicker. Push out for free at linkedin.com/locked on college. At linkedin.com/locked on college. Post job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, so I want to talk to some about the pass catchers, and I think we should open up with one thing. This segment and this idea is entirely assuming that you lose a receiver and you want to add a receiver. A number of the 20 plus people in the transfer portal from the University of Houston are pass catchers, right? And I looked at a couple different trends of Willie Fritz guys and a couple of different guys in the transfer portal. And was like, okay, if they wanted to go lose a receiver, gain a receiver, if they liked the breakdown positionally of the team at that point, I kind of get where they could go and looking in the transfer portal. I kind of looked at two different ways to break down the receivers. I also, though, want to preface this by saying, because I can see a couple of you that are frequently saying this in the comments, commenting down below, but Parker, why would they add more receivers? The wide receiver room is stacked. It is, even after transfers out, a very talented room, to say the least. And I'm excited about guys like Pecan Muse, if I'm being really honest. We hadn't even seen a whole lot of in a Houston Cougar uniform besides the spring game. However, I do think it's worth noting that oftentimes you have a lot of receivers on college football roster because it's just something you like. Pass catching is a thing that guys will have hamstrings, have ankles. Frankly, knock on wood, get a hit in the head. Like they'll need subs, they'll need replacements, and you can never have too many. Okay, that being said, there are kind of two types of receivers that you see Fritz go with here. If you look back at his time, he typically prides himself and his staff on developing guys. They either get an undersized guy and develop him into an elite pass catcher that the size doesn't matter kind of guy, or they get the big, strong, stiff guy and show you how versatile it can be with the right coaching, right? That's kind of the two different ways that it goes. On the one side, the smaller guys, I saw two guys that stuck out to me as, big heart, big speed and agility, and not quite big frames. And the first one of those is a guy that just entered the portal on Saturday, Jay Fair. Jay Fair would have been the leading returning pass catcher at Auburn. 31 catches, about 400 yards, just under 400 yards. And the portal on Saturday, he's listed at 5'10", a buck 80. I bet he's closer to 5'9", 175. Kid can move. He can really move. And I could see how that would be a big pickup for Houston, right? Pull him out of an SEC program. He had the portal. I think there was some inkling about like his role changing some next year because of guys they were bringing in the portal there in Auburn. But right, like he can play. He played at the SEC level, and so I think that there's a lot of reason to uh, have good inklings about that. Jay Fair be a good pickup for Houston. JJ Henry, 5'9", a buck 65. He actually entered in December in the portal. He's from Ole Miss. He's originally from Texas, went to McKinney North. He just finished his redshirt sophomore year, was a four-star recruit at a high school, high-end recruit, etc. Only got to play a little bit here and there while at Ole Miss. Ole Miss is a program that Coach Fritz has coached against, knows what they can do, knows how much talent they got in that roster, and could easily understand as well as anyone why a star at 5'9" could be on their bench, right? And so that's the two smaller guys I'm looking at in the portal right now. Again, subject to change, etc. Quick going through who all is in. More people could be in by Tuesday, right? It's like who's to say there aren't better options in later? But I think both Jay Fair and JJ Henry are good options to look at right now. As far as bigger kids, sturdier kids that you could see making the kind of leap where they come to play for Coach Fritz and they work on something besides just being the big jump ball guy or the big box out kind of guy. Shea Whitting, 6'2", 220 at a Boise State. Originally went to A-Leaf Taylor High School, right? He had a Tulane offer at a high school, and I think he can do the combo H-back wide receiver kind of stuff that we know Barbay and Emanya Gavi and the offensive staff wants to use some of. You could have a pass catching guy in situation as opposed to like the giant that's Malik Carr. Malik Carr can catch the ball too, but it's a giant at tight end or Matt Burns, right? It's kind of a nice like traditional tight end size guy. This guy's more of a wide bodied receiver. And so, add some different dimensions to that for what it's worth. And we'll talk about some of this in the final segment. Shea Whitting is a high end academic guy. I mean, 4-time all academic Mountain West Conference Scholar Athlete of the Year in the 2019-2020 school year for the Mountain West. I mean, high-end academic guy, and that's so important to what Fritz is trying to build here, the culture he brings with him, the culture brings wherever he goes. And so I think that's important to keep in mind here. It's like that might weigh heavier for Fritz than it does to the average college coach. So you might see more intention between Fritz and a guy like Whitting. Jalen Waltall is a 6'2", buck 85. He's from Hawaii. We've talked about him some before. At Hawaii, they use him a lot more like just like straight line, go up and get the ball kind of stuff. Not a whole lot of complex route running for him there at Hawaii. I have to say he's fairly smart, though, if he got to Hawaii. Not because it's the highest academic rated institution or anything like that, but because that's a great decision. Went to Manville High School, though, and so I think it's important to know that he's from Houston. He had the Tulane offer at a high school, so Fritz is acquainted with his game. I think that all of that is to say that having a Tulane offer from the Fritz regime there, being from Houston like both Whitting and Waltall are, I think all of that folds into, they're already the kind of kid that Fritz wants to build things around. If they're looking to get into the Power 5, Power 4, Power 5, Houston's kind of that nice step for them as the program is rebuilding itself, and they can show off some talent here. Now, again, I understand Houston's wide receiver room, even after some exodus of a number of talented guys, has a lot of talent left, right? It's not like they're short on wide receivers at Houston, especially when they're looking at having only 3, maybe sometimes even 2 on the field at a time. There's some really, really talented guys at Houston. But you can never have enough. You can never have enough. And I think that if they wanted to go 1-to-1 with the guys that were leaving, those are some important names to keep in mind. Now, I think what Houston's doing in the portal is interesting because they actually have a little bit of a built-in advantage here. We'll talk about that in a second. But first, if we're trying to talk about advantages, it is time for the NBA playoffs. It is time for all kinds of fun with baseball. It is time for all kinds of fun with our buddies at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Again, it is playoff time in basketball, playoff time in hockey. Baseball's in full swing. all kinds of ways to get in on the action. And FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. It's $150, win or lose, but on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. What are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/locked on and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, now I said I want to talk in the last segment here about some hypothesizing I'd had over the weekend about how Houston's actually an interestingly good spot in the portal. Now, Houston did have over 20 guys into the portal in this window, and they're close to 30 between the two windows combined, with some notable names. I don't mean to downplay the talent that left Houston this offseason. Again, pros and Patrick Paul and Nelson Caesar. High-end recruits and Michaelis Pilot or Matthew Golden or Sam Brown produced in the field, right? I get the argument for that. But the nice thing about when Houston's spring happened and how this is all unfolded is Houston's got a blank slate at the front end of this whole window now, right? The Houston spring game and exit interviews were all at the front end of when these college teams are having them. A number of teams just played over the weekend. There's some teams that are not quite done yet. As Houston was at the front end, all of their transfers out, all their exits happened early. Houston was kind of the story across a lot of people covering college football in the Big 12 or in the South because it was the flood that was happening, right? Shortly thereafter, Colorado happened. You're seeing a number of SEC guys happening. Like, this is all starting to roll out. And again, I told you a couple times now, I've got recruiting experts estimating 1,000 guys, thousands plural guys in the portal in 2024 in the January and spring windows, right? This is just part of the game now, folks. As this is unfolding, you're seeing a lot more names. Houston, at this point, knows where their vacancies are. They know who their coaching staff is. They've seen their spring game. They know what they need to get better at. They know where to go find guys. They know what kinds of roles, what kinds of spots, what kinds of things they need. It's like if you're an artist with a big blank canvas, you're going to the store to buy paint, you have an idea of what your canvas size and shape is, and you're going to go find the tools to put the best picture together, right? Or in Willie Fritz's case here, you're putting the best team together, right? I think that it also is worth pointing out that Fritz is trying to build, and I mentioned this some in my last segment when talking about one of the recruits, Shea Whitting from Boise. Fritz is a very specific kind of culture and specific kind of kid he's looking for. They're high character, giving back to their community type guys. It's a big thing for Fritz. And the big thing you hear him talk about that's very tangible for Fritz is from an academic perspective, he touts regularly about how at Tulane they were to build that program up while also graduating everyone who played for him. High-end academic guy, and again, it's a good private school in New Orleans and all that too, right? And we know that Dr. Couture has kind of upped the ante for the academics at the University of Houston, and I'm sure that played some role in bringing Fritz in, but also he's looking for guys that he can trust to get those kinds of things accomplished at Houston, the same way he was looking for guys that could get that kind of thing accomplished at Tulane. And for what it's worth, 3 of his biggest names he brought in the first transfer window were his Tulane guys. Corey Platt Jr. is a future NFL linebacker, assuming he makes it most of the way, if not 100% of the way back from that knee injury, right? And I think it's safe to say he probably does. Keith Cooper had as good a spring game as any lineman for the university. He certainly isn't any defensive lineman. If you want to compare him and Pancake, it'd probably be 50-50, half one to half dozen, 6-1 the other. I get that saying wrong all the time. But great interior battles between those guys there, right? Keith Cooper had a great spring game. Kentrell Webb makes a fairly talented and deep safety room all of a sudden, right? With AJ Halsey, Mo Williams III. Like all of a sudden, you got a very strong wide receiver, fairly strong safety room. And Kentrell Webb brings experience playing for Fritz and can kind of like shed light to the younger guys about like what the expectations will be for Fritz with some of your more talented guys on the roster all of a sudden, right? This is the same former Tulane coach that took top 15 Ole Miss last year to the brink, and took him to the brink while missing Corey Platt Jr., I would add, like their future NFL linebacker. And so now that he's in Houston with Fritz, but B, I think it's safe to say, like, all the cupboards may feel a little bare if Fritz can go find some Fritz type guys in the transfer portal. Obviously, rebuilds take time, and nothing is a light switch. But I do think it's safe to say that, like, this program's upward trajectory could almost be more fast forwarded because of the amount of spots he can go find guys in now, right? If the roster was full, if the scholarships were taken up, honestly, the truth matter is he'd kind of try to work those guys into the system. And sometimes not all those guys, right? Some of the kids that we lost are good kids and talented kids, but sometimes you're also trying to fit square pegs in round holes, and that doesn't work quite as well, right? Giving this gigantic blank canvas to Fritz as he moves forward, and as you're seeing guy after guy after guy leave other programs in the country, means if he sees a guy that fits what he wants, his program, his culture, his standards, and can play Big 12 football, he can go, right? He knows he's got the spots. He knows where the spots are. He's ready to put this thing together. And I weirdly feel like that's actually a better spot than if you only had a handful of spots open, right? Or if your spring game were the last spring game in the Big 12, you're like figuring all this out at the end of the cycle, right? Like at the front end here, you got a great chance, if you take advantage of it, to really, really, really build something special. And I think Fritz gets it done at some point. I wonder, based on how this portal window goes, could it actually happen earlier? And that remains to be seen as guys continue to come in or decide to leave or what have you. Thank you all so much for making Locked On Cougs your first listen day. A couple pieces of information you need to have in your back pocket. There is not going to be a Tuesday episode. We're celebrating some stuff on Monday night as a family. So I don't think I'll be able to get to the computer to do a whole lot of recording. Obviously, some crazy, gigantic news breaks. We'll get here and we'll talk about it, even if it's a brief, abbreviated bonus episode or something like that. But don't be surprised if nothing drops on Tuesday with some family stuff going on Monday night on this end. The second thing I'll say is I said I'd drop more about my hot sauce picks later. I'm a big green Tabasco fan on most things, and I really like Louisiana, the One Drop or the Crystal, those kinds of flavorful hot sauce. I'm more of a flavorful hot sauce guy than a hot sauce guy, if I'm being completely honest. And not because I can't do the hot. That's like, why? Like I super hot's fine, but like, why? Thank you all so much for making Locked On Cougs your first listen today, each and every day here. Really appreciate it. We really appreciate if you'd subscribe. Hit the bell on YouTube so you know when we're live. Locked On Cougs is a proud member of Locked On Podcast. I'm with your team, our Houston Cougars, each and every day, except for potentially Tuesday, but that's a one-time thing. Go Cougs.